Alrighty, welcome to the fast carbon cycle. You can also call this the carbon-oxygen cycle because this is what actually got the oxygen up into our atmosphere that allowed life as we know it to start existing here. Now, with our last carbon cycle, the slow carbon cycle, that was all kind of inorganic, non-living processes. In this carbon cycle, we're actually going to get into interactions with our biosphere. Biosphere just means every single thing that is living on planet Earth. So we're going to start to see where living things are going to affect our biogeochemical cycles. So if we jump right in, we're going to start with photosynthesis. This is a process where organisms called autotrophs are going to make their own food. Autotrophs are mostly plants, algae, and some cyanobacteria. It means that they don't need to eat in order to make nutrients. They actually get it through a process called photosynthesis. Now we're going to start out with carbon here, since this is the carbon cycle. What happens in photosynthesis is that plants take in carbon dioxide. They also use energy from the sun and water, and they go through this chemical process photosynthesis, and what is released is oxygen, that's O2, and then this compound, C6H12O6. This is a big compound, but you know it as simply sugar or glucose. You can see that the carbon has gone from a gas, carbon dioxide, into either a liquid or a solid, into sugar, something that can be used by other organisms. So if we want to break that down into its chemical reaction, we got carbon dioxide, we got water, it's going into the plants. The plant is using energy from the sunlight to make this reaction happen, and from this reaction we're getting oxygen and we are getting sugar. Now this is actually just absolutely amazing because these plants, these producers, are able to take carbon dioxide and turn it into something that the rest of us living organisms can actually use in terms of sugar. I mean, you can't just go outside and try and breathe carbon dioxide in order to get the carbon that you need to survive. That wouldn't work out. Besides, we're really not made to breathe carbon dioxide. That would be a really bad idea. So these plants are able to do that, and that's why these autotrophs are often called producers. This is another ecological term from them, and that's because they produce the food, they produce the nutrients that form the base of all different food chains. So plants can be known as autotrophs. They make their own food, and producers because they are producing usable food from carbon dioxide for the rest of us living organisms. Now, if we get to what actually happens when something other than a plant comes along, we're going to look at a process called cellular respiration. Plants and autotrophs do photosynthesis. Animals do cellular respiration. So autotrophs, auto meaning self, troph meaning eater, whereas animals, we are called heterotrophs. Hetero meaning different, troph meaning eater, so that means that we have to eat others in order to get our nutrients. So another word for this would be consumers. So animals, even animals who eat plants or who are vegetarian, vegan, whatever, they are still heterotrophs and they are consumers. So what happens is us animals, we are able to eat the plant and gain that glucose, those nutrients, as well as breathe in the oxygen, which is being produced as a waste product from photosynthesis. Now inside the little animal body, the glucose is going to be broken down, and that's going to turn into energy. Energy to live, move, do all the things that animals do. That's from breaking down that glucose. Now, the products of this, what happens at the end of this, is that animals breathe out carbon dioxide and also a little bit of water vapor. So hopefully you're starting to see that the ingredients for photosynthesis are starting to look like the end products of cellular respiration and vice versa. So we're actually going to look at the chemical formulas for these. This is not something that you need to memorize, but just so you can get an idea. In photosynthesis, we're using carbon dioxide and water. We're using the energy from the sun in order to create glucose and oxygen. Now, if we looked at respiration, it's going to be exactly the opposite. In this case, we're taking in oxygen, we're taking in glucose, we're breaking those down, and just the breaking of bonds in glucose is turning into energy, which animals use to live, and then we are exhaling carbon dioxide and a little bit of water. Now, what's really cool about this, the whole energy part of this, is that if you think about it, energy is flowing through the system. The plants are using energy in order to create this larger compound glucose. They're getting that energy from the sun. As animals, we are breaking down that larger compound into smaller compounds we use as nutrients within our body, and we are getting energy. So the energy, as we've been talking about since the Big Bang, it's neither created nor destroyed, it's just flowing throughout the system. Technically, the energy that we have in our bodies to live every day is the same energy that plants are pulling in from the sun. But most of all from this, I want you to start seeing the cycle. So we got animals doing respiration, plants doing photosynthesis. You can see carbon dioxide is going one way, oxygen's going the other, even water and glucose. So you're going to see where a cycle is going to start to form here, especially with that carbon dioxide and oxygen. What plants breathe in is carbon dioxide. They, in a way, breathe out oxygen, whereas animals, we are breathing in oxygen and we are breathing out carbon dioxide. So we're making this perfect kind of little cycle in between each other. And then, as I talked about, we've got energy from the sun making photosynthesis happen. And then once you, basically as respiration is happening, it's releasing energy that the animals can use. So once you get carbon inside of an animal, it can travel all throughout the food chain. So I'm sure you've seen this before. It's a food web. Basically, the carbon that was inside of the plant, say, is going into the mouse eats the plant. The snake eats the mouse. The snake now has that carbon. If the hawk eats the snake, the hawk now has that carbon, so on and so forth. So you can see the carbon just in the form of animals and animals eating other animals. This is traveling all throughout the food chain, with these animals being kind of temporary little carbon stores until they get eaten by another little carbon store. What also happens is animals will die and start to decompose. The decomposition process, or the breaking down of this dead flesh and bones, this also releases atmospheric carbon dioxide. Something else that's happening, which is actually going to relate a little bit more to our slow carbon cycle, is that the carbon within an animal's body is going to start to get buried. So we have lots of carbon in the ground in the form of decomposing and decomposed animals. So if we put all of this together in a nifty little cycle right here, you can start, say we start with our plants right here. They're using photosynthesis to bring in carbon dioxide. They are releasing oxygen. These plants are consumed by an animal. The animal is also breathing in that oxygen. The animal is living, breathing. It does respiration, which is releasing that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Also, plants do actually do respiration as well. And then when the animal dies, that's going to turn into decomposition. So lovely little cycle. This is kind of a very simplified version of our carbon cycle. But we haven't talked about us being humans. We're animals, yes, we act as heterotrophs and we act as consumers within this cycle, but we also have added some other parts, which we are going to look into next. We're going to start looking at regular versus rampant carbon. Usually when I'm talking about regular versus rampant, we're talking carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. So I know we just did this, but to refresh your memory, this is what we would call regular carbon cycle. All these arrows are pretty much equal. What's going in is coming out, and vice versa. Now, what this carbon cycle does for us is pretty nifty. So as you know, our Earth's out there floating in space, and it is protected by an atmosphere. This atmosphere is composed of carbon dioxide, among many other things, but there's a lot of carbon dioxide. So what happens is sunlight in the form of energy, it comes from the sun. Note, this is not to scale at all. And that's going to hit our Earth. Now, some of that sunlight is actually blocked and sent back into space. We talked a little bit about how our atmosphere actually blocks some of those more harmful electromagnetic waves. So some of those UV rays, X-rays are getting blocked, which is very nice for all the living things there. Some of the sunlight, it's going to hit the Earth. Some of it gets reflected off the Earth back into space. And some of this sunlight energy is trapped in the atmosphere. It's trapped as heat. Now, this is really good. This makes life possible. And we call this entire effect the greenhouse effect. That's because this is the same way that someone might create, basically, if you've seen a greenhouse, it's a little windowed house. It keeps in warmth so that you can grow flowers and vegetables even in the middle of a cold winter. It's really nice for the Earth because it means that plants can grow, photosynthesis can happen, and also that it is keeping the Earth at a nice, warm, comfortable temperature where we as living beings can exist, where water can exist as a liquid to make life possible. So this greenhouse effect is actually really good, and it's what's kept our temperature rather stable over the past few 100,000 years and allowed humans to live and become successful. So the greenhouse effect is really nice. But remember, we're talking the greenhouse effect with just the regular carbon cycle. Now, I showed you all the ways that the carbon cycle works just out in nature, but as humans, we've actually added to this a little bit. So if we start down here at the bottom, decomposition, I told you that the carbon of dead animals gets stuck under the ground. Now, millions of years of heat and pressure underground is actually going to turn this into fossil fuels. This could be oil, gas, coal, anything that we use for fuels that was once a living organism. Humans actually mine this, so we're taking this out from underground, and then we are, through various ways, doing something called combustion. We are burning these fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels are made of lots of carbon, and as we burn them, we're actually turning them back into carbon dioxide, which goes out into the atmosphere. So this carbon that was sort of meant to be in the ground and sort of stay in the ground for geological time periods is being taken out, burned, and then put into the atmosphere where it usually is not hanging out. Now you could just say, well, this is another little branch of the carbon cycle. Maybe it'll all even out. Fortunately, that is not the case here. All the arrows in this particular carbon cycle are not all equal. While this carbon cycle is going off nice, it pretty much balances each other. What we are doing is we're doing a ton of mining and a ton of combustion. So we are putting so much more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than the atmosphere could really handle. So we're doing a lot more mining and combustion than, respiration would be happening with plants and animals. So this is where we get to the difference between regular carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, which is giving us a nice greenhouse effect, letting us live on the planet, versus rampant carbon dioxide, which is coming from human activities. Us taking all that carbon store, which should be deep, deep within the ground, we're taking it out of that form and putting it into an atmospheric form. So there is a difference between what the carbon cycle is supposed to do versus sort of the pressure that we've put on the carbon cycle by taking carbon from one form to another. So instead of just a little bit of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we are putting a lot more in there. So if we looked at what's happening on a global scale here, as we put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you can think of making the atmosphere thicker, putting a warm blanket around that atmosphere. So we still have the same amount of sunlight coming in. Still the same amount of sun is being blocked. Those particular UV and cosmic rays that would be harmful to life are being blocked back into space. But we start seeing differences when we look at the energy that was usually reflected back into space is now being reflected back onto the Earth. It's basically hitting the thicker atmosphere. It's not able to escape. It has to turn around and become another parcel of energy that's heating our atmosphere. Also, more of that energy is trapped as heat within the atmosphere. So what this means is that less energy is able to leave and more energy is getting trapped in this thicker atmosphere. When you have more energy, that means you have much more heat. And that is not a great thing for humans or a lot of other organisms living on the planet. And this is what is leading to global warming or climate change. So although the climate does change differently, and we are going to get way into this, it all starts with warming. More energy as heat being trapped within our atmosphere is warming up our air and water. And we're going to learn all about what the effects are to this. You can think of this in a little metaphor that the extra carbon dioxide, the rampant carbon dioxide that we're putting out into the atmosphere, it turns into like a blanket. So think about a summer night and it's really hot and you just go grab like the thickest quilt you can and wrap it around yourself. Like that's going to be super, super uncomfortable. You're just going to get really hot. That's what we're doing to our Earth by creating this blanket of carbon dioxide that is trapping the heat in Earth's air and water. So this is where we're going to start to see the human impacts on our biogeochemical cycles. After all, the humans, we are part of that bio, that living part. And as you can see, even in just this one cycle, everything is going to be interconnected. So as we've seen through both our fast and slow carbon cycles, carbon is in the geosphere, it's in the rocks, it's in the hydrosphere, it's in water, it's in the atmosphere, obviously, is carbon dioxide, and it's in the biosphere, carbon basically making up all living things. So that's every single part of Earth. What this means in the long run is that if you have a change to, say, the carbon in the geosphere, that's going to also affect the carbon that's going to be in the hydrosphere, atmosphere, biosphere. Any one of these changes, any carbon change, the amount or the way that it's formed in any of these spheres of the Earth is going to affect all of the others. Nothing is happening in a vacuum. And that's kind of the main point that we want to get from this idea of the carbon cycle, is that even giant, long geological processes like the slow carbon cycle, that's going to be affected and affect the fast carbon cycle that's happening on kind of an hourly, daily, monthly, yearly basis, where carbon is just being exchanged kind of from the atmosphere to plants and animals back to the atmosphere again. All of this is interconnected, and so a change to one is going to be a change to the rest of them, which is something we really want to keep in mind kind of for the rest of this entire earth science class. So I hope this made sense. Please email me if you have any questions at all. Be sure to fill out your diagram and your notes, and I will see you next time.